Happy Monday. How's it going?
It's going well. How are you doing, Joe?
Doing really well. Doing really well. Just hanging out in Thailand right now. You look like you're
Yeah,
somewhere else besides your house.
I'm in Joshua Tree. I'm visiting my
Oh,
sister. It's pretty awesome out here. So I haven't,
that's
I've
rad.
actually never been to their house out here. So this is, yeah. But yeah,
That's
Thailand
cool.
sounds amazing. I've never spent time there.
Yeah, it's nice. Just hanging out at a hot springs resort right now. Yeah, real crappy day here. So, uh,
Yeah, I almost could
awesome.
see you just moving out there, like making this your base. But who knows?
Oh, uh, don't be surprised if that happens. So,
Yes.
yeah, it's a pretty nice spot. So,
Yeah.
well, cool. Yeah. So for the audience, we're actually pre-recording this because Matt and I are out and about, and I very possibly will be in an area on during a regularly scheduled time to record. Well, there might not be internet, so we figured pre-record this, and
Well,
we're going
not
to
to
talk
mention the
about
time zone, right?
oh, the
Like
time
what
zone. Yeah,
time
the
is it
time zone's a
there?
big thing.
Yeah.
It's 7 a.m. there, and what time is it for you?
It is, what is it? It's 4 o'clock. So
Yeah, but we're on
yeah,
different days. So I'm in the future. You're on the
exactly.
prior day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we came to
And at
find
9
out that the
a.m.
recording is a bit hard. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And at our usual time, I think it's like 11 p.m. or something, right? Like the
Yeah.
usual broadcast time. Yeah.
hmm Yeah.
So,
So it's a bit gnarly. Um,
yeah.
Well, cool. Let's hop into it. So I think we're going to talk about today, how to write a best-selling tech book. So we wrote Fundamentals of Data Engineering on O'Reilly. That came out kind of mid to late last year. It is a best-selling book. I think by most accounts, uh, it's quickly becoming sort of the canonical text in data engineering. So that's pretty cool to see. But
It's exciting.
yeah, it's pretty cool. We weren't always so lucky or fortunate. I think we'll get into the role that luck plays into the success of a book in a bit. But I guess for the listeners, why did we decide to write a book in the first place?
I think what it came down to is that we identified a gap basically in the market. So there were lots of great tech books on specific technologies. Like you could find a book on Hadoop, you could find a book on Kafka, you could find lots of books on AWS, but we didn't see anything that attempted to sort of weave the threads together, right? And I think we
Yeah,
realized pretty early that the challenge of weaving the threads all together is you couldn't go super deep on the kind of pedagogy, the instructional aspect for specific procedures of how to do things. And so you had to take a
right.
higher level view, and you had to recommend other resources for people. You had to tell them, okay, if you want to understand, I don't know, the details of Kafka, you need to look at a resource over here. And if you want to understand the details of Snowflake, you need to look at some other resource as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's true. And the book that I think a lot of data engineers had used was Designing Data Intensive Applications, which strangely
Right.
enough wasn't a data engineering book. I think that book came out around the time data engineering as a title was becoming a thing, but that was really a software engineering book. If you look at how Martin wrote it, it was for
Yeah.
software engineers who had to deal with distributed systems. It's a fantastic
And
book.
computer
Um,
science. Yeah, it's a
Computer science,
fantastic
yeah.
book. Yeah.
It's one of the best books I've ever read. I think I've read it like 3 times. Um,
Yeah.
Great book. But we also, I think what we felt like there needed to be a prequel to his book. A lot of data engineers would come into the space and immediately be suggested his book. And that book's going to throw you into the deep end, I think, out of the gate. So in order to
Yeah.
pick up a lot of the basics, there's a big gap as you pointed out. You could there were lots of random blog posts, but a lot of the blog posts we found too were kind of garbage because it was about like, what does a data engineer need to know? And a lot of the articles would point to, you got to learn Hadoop, you got to learn Pig, you got to learn Spark. And again, it's very tool centric. But when kind of looked under the covers, it's like, okay, so like what are the things that a data engineer needs to know that's maybe technology or tool agnostic?
Yeah, my other comment about blog posts is that we actually relied on a lot of blog posts when we wrote the book, but again, there was a need to kind of weave the threads together. And so you could
Hmm
go look at a lot of different blog posts about specific data engineering topics. Like you would have a blog post that talked about one aspect of data modeling, or a blog post just about, say, data engineering ops in the cloud or something like this. But as far as tying those together, I think the goal of publishing a book was to kind of reference all these materials and bring them together in one place and then say, okay, if you need to know the
Yeah.
details of a particular thing, then go find the blog post, go find the other book that has that.
Yeah, exactly. I think giving our own unique spin on it too. I mean, we came up with, I would say,
Yeah.
some original concepts, and ideas in the
Yeah.
book. It wasn't like we just slapped together a bunch of references and called that a book. I think we also put our own spin on it, and
Yeah,
and also did the second, third order level thinking you need to write a book that will stand the test of time in 5 to 10 years. It's I
right.
would say the hardest part of writing a book like this is definitely kind of understanding what's not going to change as much as other
Yeah,
things, and that was, and we'll get into that why that was hard. But really, that's the essence of the book. I've heard some people say that our book is just kind of a hodgepodge of references. I would say that's certainly true. I would also say it's also true of Martin Kleppmann's book and pretty much every other book that's written in tech. Like it has to be a compilation of references. But in order to make a book interesting to and useful to readers, you also have to give your unique spin on it. And um,
right.
I think by most accounts, I think we definitely say we did that. Writing it was not easy. If it was a just an accumulation of references, that would be a wiki page. And so um, you
Yeah.
know,
I mean, the higher level thinking is like a framework to think about these problems, right? Like, what is
yeah,
your intellectual framework for thinking about data engineering problems? And so
I hadn't
that's where
seen
we,
anyone come up with what we came up with
yeah,
before. I mean, just
yeah,
it's a fact, and the data engineering life cycle, which we'll talk about in a bit. I mean, that's been highly referenced in a number of talks and articles and so forth. So so again, it's to write a book like Fundamentals of Data Engineering, and we'll get into this right now. I think we got a lot of pushback at first too. So the process of writing a book, which we'll get into, is when you come up with a book idea, if you want to go to a publisher, they make you write a book proposal, and the book
yeah,
proposal has to constitute an outline of what you're going to talk about, and it has to constitute, it's basically a business plan for your book, like
right.
who's going to read this, who's it for,
Yeah, target
what's it,
audience, a
what
description. It's not just an outline that says, describe your book. Like explain, how are you going to explain it on Amazon.com? How are you going to explain it on O'Reilly.com, what this is about?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Like why is data engineering important right now? What's the trends that would,
right,
because the publisher is going to invest a lot of time into this book and a lot of resources. So they want to make sure they're taking a bet on something that's successful. And what we found
right.
interesting was um, O'Reilly's acquisitions editor, Jess Haverman at the time. So when you try and get a book signed, you're dealing with an acquisitions editor, which is
Yeah,
strange because they don't really edit anything. But I talked to the other AEs about this, and it's like the editor kind of drives them insane. But that's the title, acquisitions editor. So
yeah,
they're basically sort of the A&R, in the music industry, that's what it's called. Somebody who's going to find new hits, sign them. They're sort of
yep,
the front line. You can
exactly.
also think of it like a product manager in some ways, right? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, they're editing in the sense that they choose what's even going to be done, right? From the obviously you can go write a book independently, but they choose what's going to be funded by O'Reilly and who's going to be a project for them. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Because I mean, they want to make sure that the books they're signing are going to be hits, right? And so
yeah,
originally, our
exactly.
acquisitions editor, she told us this book was going to be incredibly hard to write because how
Yeah, I
you're
mean, she
trying
was
to
right.
define an entire field. She was right for sure. And she I think very gently tried to dissuade us from writing this book. It was she said there's definitely easier books to write for your first book, but you and me were like, well, we choose we chose violence, as the old saying goes, and so I think she definitely, Jess, shout out to her. She took a big bet on us, I would say, and
Yeah,
definitely grateful for that. But so that if you're interested in writing a book, that's the first thing is you want to make sure your book proposal is solid. You want to make sure your acquisitions editor really believes in your vision for the book. And typically what you're given is a year, maybe slightly longer timeline to finish your book, right? So the book proposal is your contractual agreement with the publisher.
yeah, yep,
This is the scope that you're bound to. Now, we'll get into the writing process in a bit and why there's some allowance for things like table of contents maybe shifting and so forth.
right.
But for the most part, this is what you're signing up for. This is your tour duty. So you better make sure, what you signed up for is what you want to do. And so we wanted to write a book again that would stay relevant 5 to 10 years from now, right? We weren't interested in writing the next, data engineering on Azure kind of book. I mean, those are great books, but this one was really something where we felt if we're going to put our name on something, let's maybe try and write the book that defines the category. So
Yeah, exactly right. And I think what we both recognized is that as we moved out of the kind of Hadoop era into the more cloud-oriented data engineering era, there was a need for this sort of meta thinking about how to stitch all the pieces together. And so that's
Yeah.
where it just hadn't been done yet. And so that's how we jumped into this project. And like you're saying, it has to be, you have to be absolutely committed to that idea. You have to be prepared to have the right background to write that book, but then just to do a ton of research on top of that and a huge amount of thinking to map out your ideas. And then there's the writing on top of all that.
Yeah, I would almost suggest, in retrospect, I think a lot of my time was spent researching, right? I mean, this was not an
Yeah.
easy book to write, and
Yeah.
there's just a ton to know. There's no way you could possibly, I don't think, know all the granularity that we wrote out of the gate. If you do, congratulations. Then you have the
Yeah.
hard part of writing it out. That's the other crux. So you got to be good at, I think, researching and writing. I would suggest if you have a book idea, do a lot of the research before you commit to a book proposal, because if your book gets signed by a
Yeah.
publisher, the clock starts ticking, and you need to be spending your time writing and probably doing less time researching. Obviously, you're going to be doing research because the field changes a lot, but I would say, in retrospect, the thing I would have done differently, I think we would have done differently, is definitely do a lot of the research up front and then get
Yeah.
the book signed.
Yeah, because we did some reorganization, but any reorganization after the book proposal is kind of painful. It's not that the editors are really going to resist changes, but it is that they're going to want to see, okay, what's your new outline? What are we approving here? Like, you're changing what you're doing. And that kind of
Yeah,
happened. Obviously, that did happen to us. And so the more you can get that out front, at least having a really solid outline that's not going to change, that's going to make your life easier.
way easier. Yeah, it's a big thing. And so the outline is really key. And you want the outline as much for the book proposal and for the publisher as much as you want it for yourself. Like, you want to know
Yeah.
sequentially, like, what are you going to be writing? Sort of when is it due? So typically with a book proposal, and when you start writing your book, it's like 2 chapters are due by a certain date. That's typically, in our case,
Yeah.
2 months after the book got from the initial date. The first half of the manuscript is due maybe 6 months thereabouts. We had about a year to do it, maybe a few months, give or take. But then the final manuscript is due, say, a year, for argument's sake. And then, the final revisions and the final publication takes maybe an extra month. So it's 12, 13, 14 months, something like that. And again, in our case, you could submit any 2 chapters for your first two chapters. It
Right.
wouldn't
So
need
it
to
could be the last
chapter 1
chapter
or 2.
and the fifth chapter, say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What you might want to do, the first chapter is actually the hardest chapter to write, typically, right?
Well, and sometimes you want to do that after you've done everything else, because yes,
Yeah.
your outline inevitably it will change a little bit. And the first chapter really sets things up. It tees up everything else that happens in the book. And so sometimes you want to describe that after you've written everything else.
Yeah. Trying to move. The sun's getting in my face. The sun here is very intense.
I can imagine. Yeah, I spent some time in the Philippines, and it's a similar climate, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, excuse me here real quick. Yeah, so that's definitely the key for the proposal, is like making sure you got again, just a good idea of what you want to write.
Yeah.
And again, that's sort of your contractual obligation as well, right? So you don't want to be going
Right.
changing scope. I mean, it's kind of like an engineering project, really. You don't want to be changing scope all the time on an engineering project. That you can work, quote, agilely, but I would say a book it's not agile as much as maybe a software project is. It's agile in the sense where I think there's certain, and we'll get into this, but the table of contents will probably shift a bit.
Yeah.
But if you're going to write a book on, say, data engineering, and writing a book on Chat GPT or something, like, that's not the same book. And I'm sure your publishers and you are going to have a lot of hard talks. So,
They're probably not going to be happy. I mean, I would say if you want to write agile, like truly agilely, then you probably want to write on your own before you go to the publisher. But it's so hard to like motivate yourself to get things done when you're just doing it nights and weekends with another job without an actual publishing contract.
I'm going through that right now with my book. It's and I think that the saving grace is I know how to write a book right now. So it's like,
right,
I know what the process is like. But if you haven't written a book before, I mean, you might have the discipline, I would say, to do it. I would almost, and I have a lot of people asking, how do I, should I self-publish to get a publisher? I'm like, you should probably get a publisher to start out with, because you're going to learn the ropes on how to write a good book. I think O'Reilly did a world-class job in terms of helping us write a book, and
it really did.
Second.
Yeah. I mean, give a shout out to Nicole Tache. I mean, her assistance on this book was
And
just
Michelle
amazing.
Cronin, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
we had.
exactly.
We'll talk about this
And
real
Jess
quick. Then let's talk
Haberman
about
again.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah, let's talk about the writing process then, because you're assigned these people we just discussed, Nicole, Michelle. They're what's called a development editor, and so once you're done with your acquisitions editor who signs your book and gets it approved,
yeah.
the next step is go work with. You get assigned a development editor. Our development editor is pretty much like a project manager. Acquisition editor is more like a product manager.
Yeah.
The development manager is like the project manager. They'll help you with sort of the overall shape of your book. They're not going to edit your book in the way you think. They're not doing copy editing. That comes
They kind
later.
of what they do is give you early feedback. So in other words, when you
Early
turn in
feedback.
chapters, even before you're officially, they're often willing to help you even before it's the official deadline for the chapter. They'll start reading and give you just lots of comments and notes, which will help you to edit those chapters yourself and also help you for future writing so that you don't go off the rails and say, yeah, your writing style here's a bit unclear. Maybe you could change it in this
Yep.
way. And it goes, they're
Yeah,
not going to
exactly.
like edit word by word, but they're going to sometimes make comments on grammar and style that are more general. Like maybe you want to change your style in this way as you go forward writing. Because the goal is
And
to
our
really like steer you on the right course.
For sure. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and they want to make sure the book's successful, right? Because they're held to
Right.
making sure the book hits the timeline and the
Yeah.
deadline and gets out in one piece. I mean, and Nicole was, I would say, we lucked out with her. She's like the best of the best. She was the editor also for Martin Klevin's Designing Data Intensive Applications,
Yeah.
Aurelian's Hands-on Machine Learning, two of the best-selling books of all time for O'Reilly.
Yeah.
I would say we were in the best hands possible, and our book is now one of O'Reilly's best selling titles. And so, shout out to Nicole. I think she was a
Yeah.
very calming presence when we started out. Just a
Yeah.
very good person to work with. Very supportive. And you want that from your development editor because writing a book is a
Yeah.
very stressful experience. I think you want somebody who really has your back. We'll be firm with you. You don't want to be treated with kid gloves. This isn't daycare. Um, but you want somebody who really believes in you, is going to support you, because you're going to doubt yourself a lot when you're writing this book, right? It's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
you're going to doubt your ability to push through. It's just hard work. You're going to doubt sometimes your ability and why you're writing this book. I know
Yeah.
we suffered through, like, why are we writing this book? We're two hicks out of Salt Lake City, Utah. Um, you know, why are we doing this? But then you realize it's just the path you're on, and you're chosen to write this, and you're gonna do great. You just gotta really stick through it. And so, your development editor is there to help you out. So you'll have regular meetings with your development editor. If you have a co-author, you're gonna have regular meetings with each other. We can get into the
Oh,
writing
all the
process.
time. All the time.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, all the time. We had
Yeah.
the
And
misfortune or fortune, I would say, of running a business at the same time while we were
it was a little bit nuts.
writing a
Yeah.
book.
I can't
It was
kind
it
of
was
can't believe it.
insane.
Yeah.
It was nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then my comment on Michelle is that for various reasons, Nicole ended up moving on to other things at that point, to some other opportunities. And so Michelle came in late. And so she was the one who was responsible for like getting us across the finish line.
Hmm.
And Nicole had done that chapter by chapter, but then Michelle was the final push to get everything wrapped up so that our book could actually get published.
Well, and shout out to her too. I mean, she jumped in like sort
Yeah.
of about 80% of the way through.
It just took it
And
over. Yeah.
yeah, and that was a monumental task. That's a lot to catch up on. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing I would say is, okay, so you have your development editor. It's talking about cast of characters.
Yeah.
You're going to want to get a team of tech reviewers, is what it's called. So
Yeah.
O'Reilly your publisher might assign these to you. A tech reviewer is basically somebody who's going to go through your book, before it's published, probably chapter by chapter. So how this works is you're going to write a chapter, then it goes to tech review, right? So your reviewers have a chance to go through your book, or go through your chapter,
Yeah.
make comments, suggest edits, and so forth. You really want to get, I would say, a bench of 2 to 3 times the number of tech reviewers you think you're going to need, because people will drop off. Life happens.
Yeah.
People have kids. We wrote this during COVID, so people were getting sick.
They
A
just
lot of
got
crazy
super
stuff
busy.
happens.
They changed
Got
jobs.
busy.
Yeah. All kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Everything happens. Everything
Yeah.
happens. Um, but we were lucky enough. I would say early on, even Martin Klebin, who was one of our tech reviewers, which is pretty dope. It was like having a Michael
Yeah. It
Jordan,
was pretty
coaching
great
your
for him to
little league
jump in on that. Yeah.
basketball team. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we had, I would say, we lucked out in the sense where we had a lot of reviewers, and as the book went on, we were able to, get a lot of reviewers added on, kind of as the book progressed. I think a lot of people took interest and wanted to have a stake in this book's success, which I think we're
Yeah.
eternally
Yeah.
grateful for. You can see in the acknowledgments all of our reviewers. The thing that helped us too, I would say, is having the podcast, Monday Morning Data Chat, and I was
Yeah.
recording some other things, but just talking to the top people in the industry and getting the feedback was one of the most invaluable kind of cheat codes I would say we had. And we didn't, this was not the intention for writing the book, but what we realized is, we're talking to a lot of the people who helped form and shape the data industry and to a large extent data engineering.
Exactly.
And we're talking to these
Yeah.
people on a weekly basis. That's why our
Yeah.
acknowledgments are super long, because we wanted to give a shout out to everyone we had talked to who helped really shape our ideas in this book. So that was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was. It was really great to have that feedback. And in a sense, our reviewers really helped us to write the book, right? Because they kind of course corrected us. They gave us ideas, suggestions as we were going along, really added to the ideas we started with and enhanced them and pointed out our blind spots too.
Mm-hmm.
No one knows everything.
Oh.
You're never going to see your own blind spots. You need that outside feedback.
No, you're never going to know your own blind spots, and having different perspectives. And I would say it's sort of like getting ready for a boxing match. Like, you want to find sparring partners. Tech reviewers are considered to be sparring partners in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You want to find the people who are going to just beat the crap out of you. You don't want
Right.
people who are going to treat you gently and placate you.
Yeah.
Because the real world's going to be a lot harder on you. Amazon is a vicious place.
Oh yeah, the internet is a vicious place. We all know
vicious
this,
place.
right?
Yeah, it's all vicious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and the thing you got to realize is upfront, 5%, 10% of people are just going to hate your guts no matter what.
Yep.
That's how it is. And so you want to find those people early. I would say, we had people who just were ruthless in their comments. And so when you're writing a book, you got to have a really thick skin about what people say. Do not get defensive about this. This is, if you have thin skin, if you get riled up easily, I would say that writing a book is not for you. Writing a book is hard. After the fact's gonna be harder, so you better just know this up front, know who you are. If you can't accept criticism, a book's probably not what you want to be doing. So
yeah, I mean, the point is that you do want to originate a lot of ideas, but a lot of the book comes down to synthesis of what's out there of expertise in the field, and that's where the criticism is going to come in. And
for sure,
sometimes you accept the criticism and make changes, and sometimes you just disagree with the person. And both of those perspectives are valuable. Either way, you want to make sure that you're challenging your ideas and reassessing them
all the time. And this comes back to research too. Like, as your ideas are challenged, you're going to want to dig deep into areas that you probably hadn't considered, and into areas that you might find uncomfortable. And that's just part of the learning process.
Yeah.
That's part of the writing process. And so the writing process, let's talk about you and me, because I think we're very opposite in terms of, well, you and I are opposite in terms of like almost every aspect of our lives, which is, I think, why we're best friends. But it's also, it's a feature and a bug. Writing a book, I would say, with somebody who's your compliment, to put it politely, is great. It can, I think, early on, if you write with a co-author, you need to figure out how you your writing styles and cadence and all this stuff. I tend to be very regimented. It's like every day, it's like, this is what I'm writing, this is approximately what it's going to be. Matt, how do you write?
I mean, I tend to, so it's hard for me to multitask while writing. In other words, I would do a little bit every morning, but it was hard for me to get really deep on topics when I had a lot of other things to think about with the business.
Yeah.
And so my tendency was to like ignore the business on the weekends and just get into the groove of writing. And sometimes it would be like 10 hours a day. That was not.
Yeah. I mean, you crank out like 30
pages while I was
traveling and a go. It was cool.
Yeah. And then go back and edit later, make changes, but like just get it out there and then generate a lot of ideas and just, push it out the door. So
what we do is we typically, like, I'd write something, Matt would review it. I'd write something, Matt would review it. And the comments, I would say, we're pretty vicious with each other, which is good. You want this, right? Like, I remember I would, look at some things you'd write and say, like, what the F is this? And you just have to be very blunt with each other. I would say you got to provide the psychological safety to make mistakes, and just write. Because when you're writing a book, it's strange, but or it's just that simple. But the thing is, like, you get there's no extra credit for ideas. You have to put them on a page. It's writing. Words count, right? And so I tend to write by word count. I typically, at a minimum, 500 pages a day, which is about, or 500 words a day. which is a
Yeah.
page. But you really have to commit to writing. And then I think where it gets more brutal is the editing process, where you have to go through many, 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 many times, both of you and your
Yep.
tech reviewers and your development editor, and just beat the living crap out of what you just wrote. I would say the book as we wrote it changed a lot.
It did.
You know,
It did. Yeah. There were pretty significant changes as we went along. We ended up shuffling a lot of material. There were certain sections that we kind of rewrote or reshuffled many times, like architecture, just because it was so
that
challenging.
was a hard chapter. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the table of contents changed too. I think when I looked at the original, book proposal, it was like 8 chapters we're going to write, and 350 pages or something. I think it ballooned to sorry, like a gleaming emerald behind me.
Oh, okay.
Uh, like
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What
laser
is that
gleam.
exactly?
Just
No one knows. Okay.
it's annoying, is what it is.
Okay. Okay.
I'm at a nightclub. But the God, okay, cool. So yeah, the table of contents changed. I think we ballooned to what was it? How many chapters was that? Like
How many is it actually? Is it
11?
like
Yeah,
11?
because I'm trying
I
to think of
think. Yeah.
appendices now
Yeah.
too. But it's around 450
Well, because we
pages
ended up,
total.
yeah, and we ended up creating some new chapters about the future and other things. And then some material just got split out in various ways, which there is a
Yeah.
tendency for that to happen, right? And one thing you need to be aware of is that your tendency up front is going to be to say, oh, I'm not going to have enough to write about. So create a really long outline. You kind of want to do the opposite. You want to maybe you shoot for 200 pages and you end up with 400 because you'll always come up with more ideas you're writing. And this was
Oh
kind of
yeah, and
Bill
I would
Lehman's
say
comment
the
too,
the
right?
manuscript we had was probably much longer. I mean, I think it was like
Yeah.
50, 60 pages extra that weren't published. So um sorry, I think you're muted. There you go.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, so that's a lot of work. The writing, but at the end of the day, you have to really um the saving grace with working with the publisher is you have deadlines.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
so that means that you can't sort of navel gaze over everything forever. You have to set a line, and then whatever you wrote, that's what gets published, right? So,
Yeah.
so whenever, so the chapters in O'Reilly, they go out for early release. Yeah, obviously you can keep working on these, but they make these available to the public. The other thing is, if you sign with a publisher, at least with O'Reilly, you end up collecting royalties off the early release chapters on the O'Reilly platform as people read them. So you might get some extra money for a beer or whatever you buy.
Yeah. And you really
So
want to think about, so in terms of writing, we discussed which chapters you write first. And actually another thing you want to think about is that those early chapters are marketing. And so think about which chapters are going to
yep.
be really good marketing for the entire book and get those out there early because those will build buzz and you'll actually get early release reviews. And people will start posting about it on social media as they read on the O'Reilly platform. And so think about like, what is the core of the things you want to say that someone can drop into cold and understand and have some idea of what the whole book is about? Like, don't write your super, super technical, detailed chapters first that are going to require a lot of context. Write the stuff that's going to bring people in to the whole book.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah, and I think we were lucky. We got a lot of good response out of the gate. The thing that messed with
Yeah.
me personally is like our book, several months before it was due to be published, it was already a number one new release on Amazon in like several categories. And I think that really hit home. I don't know about you, Matt, but for me, I knew our book was going to be popular, just because a data engineering book is going to be popular, right? But the thing is, when it became a number one to release several months before it came out, like that messes with your head a bit. I don't care who you are, but it's like you realize like you really have to make this book good.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's it is a very, very strange sensation, to be honest.
It's intimidating. Yeah.
It is. It is. Like the more successful you are in some sense, the more intimidating it is. Like, oh wait, I
But
just intended for this for a few people amongst my friends, and now it's actually people reading it.
people all over the world, people you don't know, right? And so that to
Yeah.
me was
Yeah.
definitely that changed the game, because I realized, okay, so and that affected every aspect, I think, of how we kind of operated after, like our business, for example. I
Right.
think we're like, if this book is successful, it's going to change a lot for our business. And I think we had to
Yeah.
make a choice. Like the book is is the focus. It has to be. Even I was teaching a class at the time. Finals week was a day. Finals week was when our book was due, like the final
Right.
manuscript. And I had to tell the students, like, I am very sorry. I'm going to be the crappiest professor you've seen, and I do apologize. But this book has to get out, and it has to be really good. And so
Yep.
that just there's a lot of things that weigh on you, and you obviously do your best you can and everything, all your other commitments in life. But I think what we realized, towards the end of it is if this book um, was going to be a success, we had to make it a success. It doesn't do it on its own, and because the amount of attention on it even before it came out, again, it messed with your head. That it just makes you really hunker down, and you got to give it 100,000%. There's no
Yeah.
room for messing up. So
Yeah, and you kind of have limited do-overs, right? Like you do a lot of re-editing of yourself, but Michelle's comment was that at some point you just have to kind of push the bird out of the baby bird out of the nest. And so you really have to be aware that you're writing this stuff and it's going to go out sooner than you think. And so
sooner than you
just
think.
like really put in that effort up front to make it good before, because the deadlines will hit you before you know it.
There are, yeah. And so once your book is, so the process is okay, final manuscripts due, then it goes to copy editing. And they, I don't know who does the copy editing there, but it's insanely awesome. Like they get the whole book edited with a fine tooth comb in about 2 days. It was bizarre. Matt and I get the manuscript back with all the edits.
It was crazy.
Like, holy crap. There's thousands of them.
Yeah,
chapter.
They just hunker down and do it apparently. And then I read the entire book in a weekend and like just went over all the copy edits. And then I think you did the same thing later.
Oh, we did the same. We reread the book several times. And then here's the thing: you're not going to catch everything. I actually, somebody messaged me on LinkedIn saying there's like, on one page, one of the page references where we reference, see page blah 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 for more information. It was actually kind of a self-referential thing, which you're not going to, we sadly didn't catch it, but this does happen. I do apologize if you're going to find more errors. I would like to say though that the errata, as it's called, there will be errors. They're very minor mistakes so far. Maybe a misspelling, maybe I haven't seen anything saying, oh, this is like egregiously wrong. I would say after tens of thousands of people reading it, hopefully that's a good enough
or
catch,
they just have, or someone has a very different opinion. It's not an errata issue. It's just like someone completely disagrees with your output.
Which isn't really error.
It might happen.
But I would say inevitably as an author, like hopefully you catch everything. If you don't, it's life in the big city. The saving grace is it can be fixed. So I went through on one of my flights. Over the weekend, I just address all the errata that I'd seen, and that's how it is. And so, as an author, once your book's published, you probably want to go through and just check the submissions. You're probably not going to get it right, and that's 100% of the time, and that's just how it is. I mean, but you tell me any product release that's had like 100% error free. Even Apple doesn't get this right, so it's
that's why they have software releases, right? And then sometimes they'll have repairs for new products. Same thing with the book. No matter how much time you take, there's always stuff that is going to feel rushed. It's just a reality.
Yeah. So after the book is done, I mean, what happens, right? So books, manuscript is edited, final proofs are good to go. What happens?
So what's weird is because it's digital, you sign off on it, and then all of a sudden it's just on the website like a day later. And so it's kind of like a software build where they have a basically continuous delivery system where every time you make changes to the manuscript, they do a new build, quote unquote, build of the book, which is just like a whole rendering of the entire book. And so once you sign off on the final, it just goes out, like they release it. And then shortly after that, a couple of weeks later, the print edition starts coming out because they actually have to go physically print it, but it does drop on O'Reilly.com immediately.
Yeah, and Amazon too. I think the Kindle edition. So here's what happens too. We mentioned number one new release. That's dictated on pre-orders of Kindle, as far as I can tell. And so,
well, I think pre-orders as well, because they did have pre-orders too, right?
Okay, so they must take the total of that. Yeah, but so O'Reilly prints on demand, as far as I can tell, which means. Which is great for them because it offers some flexibility in terms of the publishing, right? So we mentioned the errors; those get fixed. I accidentally spelled one of our tech reviewers' names wrong. It was Todd Hansman. I think I misspelled it Todd Hainsman. and his wife caught it, and she's like,
He was
yeah,
really nice
it
about it, but it was hilarious
was
too.
nice.
So
I was
yeah, yeah.
embarrassed. I'm like, because he spent a lot of time,
Oh
reviewing the
yeah, he
book,
was an
and he
amazing
was
reviewer. Yeah,
such a good guy. Yeah, and so
yeah,
sorry, Todd Hainsman, about the bad review or bad spelling, but this happens. So the book gets out to the public, and then it takes on a life of its own. And this where I would say, this is what I didn't realize is the marketing and promotion is largely going to be on the author's shoulders.
yeah, yeah.
So
I mean, what I'll say about O'Reilly is their platform is huge, right? Just having that publisher and being on their site is a lot of promotion. But as far as like the actual promotion, as far as telling people about the book and getting it out there, that's on the author.
yeah, yeah. So I would say our saving grace is that we had. I would say we launched the book to a fairly big audience. So we had spent some time. The podcast I think grew our audience a ton. People knew who we were. Being on lots of other people's podcasts before the book came out. So the thing you got to realize
Yep.
is, while you're writing the book and probably before you write the book, um, you know, the number one thing I would think people underestimate is distribution and marketing is your hardest part of making a book
Yeah.
successful. Writing a
Yeah.
great book on its own isn't enough, surprisingly enough.
Right.
It's the same thing with writing software products and so forth. Just because you build it, people just so automatically show up. So you really got to put in the time, build your audience. And this is probably an entirely different podcast discussion.
Yeah.
And probably a series of articles. You should probably actually write a series of articles on how to write a book too for people who
I think it would be a good idea.
don't want to suffer
Yeah,
through the
because
podcast. But
yeah,
yeah, yeah. But yeah, at the end of the day, you as the author, you're responsible for the promotion.
yep. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so you really have to go out there and tell people what you've written and why they should care. Yeah.
Hmm. And for us, the book took off automatically. It was kind of crazy, actually. It was the number one, bestseller, pretty much out of the gate. Um, that was definitely a bit of a trip, but I think we expected it just based upon the pre-sales that we'd seen. And so as an author, that's you start collecting royalties off of this, right? So that's something you got to take into account too, because as an author, when you're making money, you're a freelancer, and so you have to think about uh, your taxes. Maybe are there
Yep.
expenses? Do you want your money to go into a company, or is that personal? With a limited liability company, LLC, that typically is a pass-through entity anyway, and so.
Yeah.
But you got to think about the tax implications of your royalties, right? Because this isn't standard income. I think the publisher will, at least with O'Reilly, they'll take out 25% automatically if you don't have your money go through an entity. I would say, I'm not your tax advisor. I would suggest, if you can do it, set up a company to have
Yeah.
your monies go through, because then you can start writing off things like laptops and other expenses, books that you
Well,
use for
also
research and so
travel,
forth.
right? So
Travel,
one of the biggest
big
things
one.
is that you should travel to promote your book. And sometimes conferences might cover your expenses, but often they won't. And hopefully you make it up in terms of book sales. But like it allows you to consider that a business expense instead of just paying out of pocket. Yeah.
Yep. So the places you wanted to go to anyway.
Right.
You should
Exactly.
go, but then what you'll realize soon is your book will take on a life of its own. If it's reasonably successful, your career is going to change, right?
Yeah.
I know for us, everything changed after the book came out.
Yeah.
We were, I would say we were relatively known before, after the book came out, um, and thankfully the book was well received. We got lucky in that regard, where a lot of people liked the book. Obviously, again, we told you there's 5 to 10% of people who are just going to hate your guts no matter what. That's also true. You just got to learn to ignore, any haters along the way, and embrace the people who. I would say look at the criticisms though. Maybe there's some valid points too. Just don't ignore it, but focus on the positive. You did it. You worked your ass off to write a book. Now you're working really hard to promote it, and that's you should be proud of yourself. You accomplished a lot, and if the book's well received, then that's really cool. You contributed to the field, and what changes after that is now you're I guess what I would call nerd famous, right? If you're writing a
Yeah.
tech book and it
Yeah.
becomes popular, you're nerd famous.
Well, I would say, I mean, one thing to keep in mind with O'Reilly is they really do, there's a lot of prestige that comes with writing for them. And so just getting a book published and out the door with O'Reilly is a great opportunity. And so if you
It's a
have
great
something to
opportunity.
contribute, definitely go talk to them. I mean, even if it doesn't sell well, just having that as a business card will make a huge difference in your life. Just saying, hey, I
Oh
wrote
yeah.
this book. Here it is on Amazon. Here it is on the O'Reilly platform. It's yeah, even though we're in 2023, having a print book that can sit on someone's shelf comes with a lot of prestige. It's really
Well,
interesting.
that's the weird thing too, because I remember some
Right.
influencers were telling me like, "Oh, nobody reads books anymore. Why are you writing a book?" Um, but I think writing a book is definitely, I would say the only way to really think critically about a subject is to write about it.
Right. Right.
And to write a book on a field, I think is the only way to really, um, I think, truly demonstrate uh, an understanding of the material that you're
Yeah.
considering. It's not the same as making a video. I mean, Lord knows we make enough videos. Like this one, you just hit record and you start talking. Writing a
Yeah.
book is a different league of effort.
Well, it involves a lot more organization of your thoughts. I think that's what it
Yeah.
comes down to, and that's what we discovered even in the outline writing process. That we had ideas about what data engineering was, but to make those truly coherent took a lot more work. And so forcing yourself to organize your ideas in that way and then present them in a book is very helpful for clarification, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, and so yeah, back to promotion. So it's like I would say that the things we did to promote and make our book successful was getting on a lot of podcasts. We were thankful in the respect where a lot of people wanted us to be on their podcasts, and so that was
Yeah,
I think pretty easy to do. Again, we built the audience and we built friends well before we needed to. I cannot understate enough how important this is. That you don't want to launch to an empty room, right? You want to
right.
have friends, you want to have allies who can help promote your book too. That's the other thing. You can single-handedly try and do this. So I'm not on social media really. I'm on LinkedIn and that's about it, which is the other weird thing, right? We didn't have like, LinkedIn. I would say is a great platform to market. I probably should be on Twitter. Maybe I'll get back on there. Who knows? We didn't use much else. So we weren't on Facebook. We weren't on Instagram, TikTok, whatever.
Instagram. Yeah,
And maybe those are some other avenues to promote. But a lot of those podcasts, people started writing articles about it. The data engineering life cycle, that was a key point that a lot of people started including in their own articles. Ben Rogojan included that in his series of blog posts he wrote on the Pragmatic Engineer Substack. And so just all these things snowballed, right? And the other thing was we started talking about the book well before it came out. I would say so. We were talking about
right.
fundamentals of data engineering. I think as far back as like almost a year before it came out, and saying, "Yeah, we're writing a
And
book."
again, promote the pre-release. Get people reading it before it's out,
Pre-release,
basically. Even if
yeah,
it's rough, even if it's rough, if you have things to say, get them reading the pre-release.
for sure. Yeah, and the thing is, there's a lot of luck involved too. Like we hit the market, I would
Yeah,
say, at the right place, right time, with the right topic. Data engineering, right? So what we're seeing right now is people want to become data engineers. How do I learn to become a data engineer? Well, you could
yeah.
take the approach of trying to read every single blog post under the sun, which might give you very conflicting answers. I think there's a lot of great content on YouTube, but Ben Rogojan's got some great stuff. Andreas Kretz, Zach Wilson, a bunch of other data engineering content producers. But that's one thing. If you wanted to read a book, though, like where would you have gone,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And people, despite the stats that do point to a decline in reading as an activity, um, a lot of people have bought our book and a lot of people have benefited from it. I think what I hit home for me, Matt, was
It's
when I went to so I got invited to keynote talks in Australia. And what hit home for
yeah.
me is like when I started autographing and taking selfies with people who had read the book. And I think that was like, okay, so this isn't just a US thing. This is a global thing. People have read the book and they really appreciated it. In fact, I got the speaking gig because of the book,
Because you'd written this book. Exactly right. Yeah. And let me
right?
add to that, both in terms of your writing and your promotion. One of the biggest things you want to think about is what unique niche do you want to occupy? Um, don't write a copycat book. Don't just write the new version and something someone else has done. Find something unique, some niche. It can be a small niche, but it needs to be unique that you're going to occupy. let that inform your writing and let that inform
Yeah.
your promotion too. Explain people
Oh, for
why
sure.
they need this new perspective. And then they're going to they'll buy your book and they'll put in the time to read it too. That's what's going to make the
Well, that's such a
difference.
good point, Matt, because I mean, you want to be stoked on what you're writing too. I mean, this is at least a year-long effort, right?
Oh, it's
Um,
so much work. You feel
yeah,
very depressed if you don't believe in what you're doing.
right. I know people who are writing books like that or have written books like that, and the
It's not a
heart's
good
not in
place to
it,
be.
and it just feels
Yeah,
like a job. Like,
right.
I mean, I think we woke up every day, stoked to write this book. Like, we just
Yeah,
really felt the mission was this needs to happen, right? Like, and we're
yeah,
the guys to do it, and I mean, that's what kept me going every day was really thinking, okay, like I'm actually like genuinely excited about this material, and
exactly.
that's what's going to keep
Yeah,
you going because you really feel like you're making a contribution to the field and hopefully helping data engineers new and old along the way.
yeah.
Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention was you want to get praise quotes to the book.
That's
So
helpful. And
those are
the
the
thing
quotes that
is,
go on the book. Yeah,
well, it's not just the quotes. It's that those are people who are actually going to help you to get your ideas out there.
yeah.
They'll give you a praise quote, but also they're going to be your allies in terms of getting people to read in the future.
For sure. And
Yeah,
so one person that stands out is Bill Inman. He's the father of the data
yeah,
warehouse and was gracious enough to write a praise quote. And what was really cool with that is he's been very generous with his time after because he's written a lot of books. He's written like 60 books or 67 books or something like that. He knows what's up, but he's become, I would say, a very close friend of mine as a result of this. And what's been really cool is uh he just the effort that he's gone through to help promote the book. Like I remember in Denver,
yeah. Denver was great.
we did a reverse interview. It was Bill Inman interviewing me on Mary McCarthy's podcast. And that's like that's such a trip. Like I don't think he's ever like interviewed anybody, right? And then we go to
Yeah,
an event downtown to promote the book, and he's there, doing an interview with me, and I thought that was just the coolest thing because like this guy, he doesn't need to do anything for anybody.
no,
He's
no.
Bill
I mean,
Inman,
he's
you know?
had, in some sense, he's had many successful careers, and he could just be retired, which
Yeah.
he's kind of quasi-retired, but not really.
No, hats off to me. He just keeps pushing the
Yeah,
field forward
yeah,
and himself. I think it's awesome. But it got,
that's
but
amazing.
getting praise quotes from somebody like that, I would say is think of who you want to get praise quotes from because that's going to help promote the book as well. And we had a lot of great praise quotes in the book. But these are friends. These are people that you can count on. Those are people that I think are putting their stamp of approval on your book too. And that's not a light thing to do. And so that's
Yeah,
something to consider. But that's also part of the promotion of the book is making sure you get the kind of the social proof, so to speak, of people who readers might recognize and look up to. So
yeah, yeah. And so, as you're thinking about your target audience, think about new practitioners, but also more senior people who might be looking for kind of a synthesis of some ideas, and that's going to feed
mhm.
into their willingness to support you once you finish your work.
Yeah. And then I guess, kind of closing it out, is there anything that we would do differently with the book?
I'm sorry, yeah, not run a business at the same time, but of course, I would definitely do that.
It is what it is.
Yeah,
Again, it's so bright here. There's sun in Thailand,
yeah,
so it's just it's it's
it is.
different.
It's kind of known for
Even
that.
though it's the land of smiles.
Yes,
Mostly because you're squinting. Sure.
right. Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, so what else do they do differently? I would say definitely the research up front, kind of like what we said. That was
yeah,
one area
yeah,
where I feel like I'm going to move real quick. That's one area where I would probably do it differently is front loading a lot of the research. Because
yeah,
again, the clock is ticking, right? So you want to make sure you're um, can dedicate a lot of cycles to writing. The other thing I would say I would do differently is uh what was it? There there's a couple chapters I would say as far as chapters go. Chapter three, I never felt happy with that, the architecture one. I don't think I'll ever feel happy with that chapter. I'd probably rewrite it. Um, it was a chapter on architecture that felt like it was just really fuzzy, and so I would try and like make that a bit more tight. Um, the notion of integrating data, I would say in chapter eight is the other thing I would add, where that's a chapter on transformation. Um, was it Larry Burns? He's like somebody I really respect in the field. He messaged me and he's like, "Why didn't you guys include a talk on integration?" It's like we actually talked about that being integration, but I felt like integrating data and transforming are kind of cousins, but they're not quite the same thing, especially if you're dealing with single events coming through, right? Like it's not really an integration. So that, but there's some subtle things I would say that I would probably reconsider and probably adapt. Um, so
Yeah, integration could touch a lot of different areas. I mean, it could certainly touch ingestion, it could touch serving. That's where it gets tricky. But in retrospect, it probably could have been one of the undercurrents or something that cut
could have
across all
been,
those
yeah.
chapters. Yeah,
Yeah, and I
yeah, I
would
think
say
that's
things like
fair.
reverse ETL in chapter 9, the serving part. I never felt good about that because I felt like reverse ETL was definitely more of a marketing buzzword than an immutable thing. And I felt like that's one condition that probably violated our expectation of having a book that would last 5 to 10 years. I think reverse
I guess
ETL as
my
a
comment would
practice will be
be
around, but yeah,
exactly. Yeah, the terminology. Yeah, yeah. The
yeah,
terminology could change. The practice is going to be there forever. Yeah.
hmm yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure what we'd call it, but anyway, just little things like that. But I don't know that structurally I would change anything right now. I'm sure the bigger question I suppose is whether data engineering is going to be a thing in 5 to 10 years. I gave a debate last week, at Starburst Data Nova event. Shout out to Starburst for the awesome backpack, by the way. This Nike
Nice.
airbag, by the way, is pretty awesome if you ever get it. It's like the most
Wow.
comfortable backpack I've ever used. But yeah, but their event, I just picked this out of the debate that data mesh would do away with data engineering. I think there's possibly an argument there. Well, I argued it, but so that's more of the macro question of whether or not data engineering, will be a thing. I can see arguments either way, but that's kind of how I guess the technology industry and data industry goes as things morph. We actually hit on this in the last chapter anyway, in chapter
Yeah.
11 or 12
The
or whatever it was,
future.
where
Yeah.
yeah, the future things change. That's how it is.
Yeah.
So
And that's the thing. I mean, so the centralization of a lot of focus around Hadoop and MapReduce has gone away, but it's evolved into data engineering, right? And so I wouldn't be surprised to see practice of data engineering evolve into something else. I don't think it's going to go away, but it might look a lot different in 5 to 10 years. And
do
so
you think the
I
life
guess
cycle
that's our
goes away?
next. Um, Probably not, but people might start calling it something else, right? And
Yeah.
maybe there is a shift more toward data mesh, but you still have these different stages, I
The life
believe.
cycle I think
Yeah,
is still there though, right? Like I don't see a
yeah,
situation
yeah.
where you're not getting data from a source system. You're not
Generating it,
ingesting it, transforming it,
collaboration.
storing
Yeah,
it, serving it, right?
yeah.
Like show me a universe where that goes away.
I mean, that's been around for decades. Well,
Right.
before the internet, even that was kind of the process.
Yeah. And so,
Wasn't called, yeah,
yeah, the undercurrents, I would say those are fairly immutable as well, like security, data management,
even
architecture,
orchestration, right? We've
orchestration.
always orchestrated.
Yep,
Okay, one thing that could change. You've talked a lot about this. Is a shift towards streaming kind of changes some of the details, right? Like the nature
with
of orchestration
orchestration.
changes in
Yeah,
a
it
streaming
does.
world and in other pieces too. I mean, you have some
Yeah,
changes, but I kind of feel like certain things will continue to show up in batch where you are doing like analytics reporting that is on a time schedule, then you're going to see batch happening.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but I can't really think apart from what I discussed. I don't know about you, but I don't think there's much I would change about the book right now. Again, it's
Yeah.
only been out for a few months, so I'm pretty sure. I'll be who knows? I'll probably be driving my car and just be like, holy crap, the whole book needs to be rewritten.
Well, and it's again what Michelle said. At some point, you just have to push it out of the nest, and you have to
Yeah,
accept it being what it is. And Bill Inman said this as well, that like for him, once it's finished, he actually worries somewhat less about promotion than we have, because he's like, well, once it's done, I don't want to think about it anymore. I'm on to the next thing,
that's
and maybe
true.
that's the way to think about it. Not trying to think about whether it's perfect or whether it's exactly right, but think about what you're going to do next and what the future is.
Well, yeah, and even Martin Kleppman, I know he's working on the next version of the design data intensive
Design data,
applications, and
yeah, the classic, yeah,
because he's Martin, he's taking a good couple years from what I heard to
yeah,
research it.
yeah.
But but that's I would say Martin stands out as somebody I truly respect and author to author because
Yeah.
I mean the amount of work he puts into researching his topics is freakish. I don't know a lot of people. I might be at that at that level with this book I'm working on right now. But because I looked at, because I realized what he's doing. I'm like, okay, that's how you have
Yeah.
to do it, right? You can
Yeah.
blurt
Yeah.
out whatever you think your ideas are, but
Yeah.
the good ideas just take a long time to form, right? Like I
They
set
will.
myself an
Yeah.
internal deadline for my book that that's subject to change. Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I was listening to a good podcast with some comedians. There's Tom Segura, Mark Norman, and Sam Worrell, and they're talking about just when do you feel like your Netflix special is good to release, right? Or your your comedy show that's been recorded. And it's like you just kind of know, right? And and then it's ready. But until it's good, you got to keep working on it. Yeah, but again, you
Well,
got to
it's like
balance that
getting a
against
gig at a big
certain time.
club, right? There's
Yeah.
an aspect of this in comedy where you don't want to get a big gig at a big, good, really great club, like really famous club, too early because your material won't be ready. But also, you can't delay
Hmm.
it forever. Like you have to be willing to step on the stage and say, "I'm going to do this night, and I'm ready, and it's not going to be perfect." And maybe the audience, hisses and whistles at me and boos me a bit, but I've got to be ready to just jump in, prepare, and then
Yeah.
go in and do it. Same thing
Yeah.
using MMA metaphors or something. Like at some point you actually have to like get scheduled to
You
just
just have
face
to get
something.
out there and do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's definitely the balance because otherwise, who's it? I was reading about some big author. It was Adam Smith actually. I think Wealth of Nations took him 10 plus years to write.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's a bit extreme, but I guess it worked out for
It's a
him.
big
I don't know
book.
if it worked. Yeah, yeah,
It's like 800
yeah,
pages or something, but yeah, but for a tech book, yeah, I mean, there's really two types of tech books. There's ones like ours, which I'd say are more kind of the high level technology agnostic books. Those are much
yeah,
more rare. The books that tend to get published are very technology focused, but those
yeah,
also tend to be very fleeting. And so I think those are probably easier to write in some ways because the material is very highly focused on a topic, a technology, and you can dive into the guts of it. To do what we did and try and define a field, I would say is just it's a lot harder. I'm not trying to toot our own horn, but it is what it is. Like if you think it's easy, you go try and do it. Go pick a field and try and define it, and try and focus on also what's not going to change maybe the next 5 to 10 years. That's a very interesting thought exercise. You try and do
yeah,
this. Um, like we thought it'd be easy coming up with this idea. I think in the book proposal process, I was like this. We spent a good month on that, I think. That was
yeah.
not an easy task,
No, no,
'cause
it's extremely. Yeah,
yeah. But again, to kind of cap it all off, like, hopefully we gave you some tips on how to write a best-selling, tech book. I think our experience is it's worth listening to. I can't say you're going to emulate what we did. A lot of things happened where it would just be impossible to replicate, and I would say there's a good portion of luck involved too.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, but anyway, thanks for listening and thanks for reading the
yeah,
book. And
yeah,
we would love for you to read it and just leave us a review. Leave a review on Amazon, leave a review on O'Reilly.com, and feel free to ask us questions, reach out, and especially reach out if you have an idea for a book and you'd like to run it by someone. We'd love to hear it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have been helping out a lot of aspiring authors just kind of get the lay of the land of
Yeah.
writing a book. I can't say we're total experts. We've wrote a grand total of one book, but
But one of a few voices, maybe for some feedback. We'd love to hear about it. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So awesome. Well, thanks to the audience, for listening to us this week.
Yeah.
It is pre-recorded, so if you're leaving comments, sorry we didn't get back to you on
Well,
the
I'm going to try
comments
to be
there,
in the
but
comments. So I don't
okay,
know what your
cool.
schedule. I think you'll be asleep, but I'll try to be in the comments and so continue the
Yeah, yeah, I think
conversation.
it's like 11
No, we're
midnight
not
here
live.
in Thailand,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. Cool. Then we got a jam-packed season of the Monday morning data chat coming up. I think we're booked all the way through like June right now, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So, and for people that want to be on the show, I would say I will say that it's invite only. We don't accept inquiries from strangers. This is by design. We want the conversation to really be free flowing. I would say, we do accept referrals from
Yeah.
friends, but um, to companies, because I'm getting inundated with requests from companies, which is why I had to put a post the other day saying we're not accepting inquiries to be on
Yeah.
the show.
Yeah.
But I'm getting like 5 to 6 per day from people who want to be on the show or from PR agencies. If you're a PR agency, we're probably not going to talk to you. I hate to say it that way, but the show is very much invite only. I mean that in the literal sense. And so, um, find other if you're a company that wants to get on the show, maybe find other ways to solicit our interest. So, or better yet, we'll find you if we think you're interesting.
Yeah,
So,
that's typically how it
because
goes.
nobody pays to be
Yeah.
on the show, we don't take money for this, and so we want to keep the conversation as original and organic and free flowing as possible. We don't want it to become a platform for companies to shill. So,
Yeah.
anyway, on that cheery note, have a great I guess day or afternoon,
Yeah.
wherever it is. It's morning here, so
Evening.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.